Welcome everybody to Reflections on Music and Nature. I'm really happy today to be talking with some of the members of Citywater, which is a contemporary music ensemble based in Sacramento. In addition to all of the programming of new music that they do, they also collaborate directly with composers, including Steve Mackey, Alexandra Gardner, Stephen Bloomberg, and a number of others. They've recently collaborated with landscape music on a concert called Visions of the Wild in Vallejo, California. Aside from being both talented and thoughtful musicians, I can also tell you personally that they're also just wonderful human beings and very generous people to work with. We have Stanley here on the cello and Cathie Apple on flute. And to both of you, thanks so much for making the time for this. It's really nice to see your faces.
It's good to see you too.
Good to see you too.
Thanks for having us on.
My pleasure. I think since this is a series about like music and nature, I'll just start by saying that both of you, and I think Jennifer at least also, are very avid outdoors people. You guys like to do a lot of marathons and you like to go camping. And so those activities are a big part of your sort of non-musical life. So I guess I wonder, have you found that those trips that you do and all this activity has any kind of direct or indirect influence on your music making, or is it just like more of a hobby, or is it kind of maybe somewhere in between?
The battery recharge. So, we like to schedule as many short backpacking trips or camping trips, or maybe one big long trip where we're just outside for days and days at a time. And it's just an amazing way to just recharge the batteries.
Yeah, I'll second that. And just in terms of like inspiration, I think my whole mindset is geared toward almost 99% of the time being inspired by something natural or something cosmological or something like, I'm a dork about space, I'm a dork about trees. And so if I'm going to put something into the music that is a little bit more me, it's going to have that edge to it. It's going to have some sort of natural or cosmological edge to it that I think is just super important.
One of the things I've always enjoyed about Citywater, I mean, there are many things that I enjoy, but one of the things that I really like is that you guys, over the years, you've commissioned a number of kind of large works. One of them for me, that was a kind of ridiculous piece that I wrote for you guys all to play. Derek Keller is another example of a big piece that he wrote that was like a half-hour piece that we'll talk a little bit about today. And then you did a piece by Sonny Nabel a while back too that was also quite large and ambitious. And
yes.
A lot of the pieces that you commissioned they also just happen to be related to nature as well. So I wonder if you could talk about some of maybe focusing on the pieces that you've commissioned. What are like the different approaches that you've noticed in pieces that are dealing with nature or related to the natural world?
Well, that's a great question. I think we've been honestly there's just been this sort of element of dumb luck where people who write pieces are like that ended up I don't think we sought out people that would write pieces that were naturally informed or inspired by nature, but we ended up with that. And I think I'd love to say that was like a vision of mine, but honestly, I think it was a lot of just really dumb luck that we just ended up with like-minded people. And the great thing was that it's actually not just us. The whole ensemble is pretty like physical. Like they like to go out and do stuff and be outside. And because of that, we always had that as a springboard place to talk about our experiences in nature. And with something like the most recent thing that we did with Griffin, the cutover lands, all he had to explain was that it was this idea of everything had been cut down on this entire stretch of the Upper Peninsula. Because that was the norm. Like that's how logging worked. You just cut everything down and then you moved on. And just that solitude of place, I think he wrote it so well that when we were playing it, at least I had that very, very vivid image in my mind of a desolation kind of situation that was man-made, that was a caused desolation. And it just made it so powerful to get to sit there and try to inhabit that and bring it out in every little nuance that you normally would add. It's super rewarding. And in terms of the scope of the pieces, it's just great that the composers went big when they could go. I think Saltskate's a really nice, broad piece, and you've got that sense of spaciousness in that piece too, but it's such a different flavor because it's a natural spaciousness. It's not, we didn't do that, it just is. And so you can kind of take it on its own terms, and I think that's a place where those natural inspired pieces, and then sometimes the piece that's inspired by our treatment of the natural world, have a kind of different mind spaces for me.
What was really fun about writing that piece for all of you is, we had talked about like what could be the scope of that piece, and and I kind of wanted to do a big piece, and both of all of you were just like, yeah, go ahead, write like a big 20-minute piece if you want to. And I think I can only speak for myself, but I think for composers to have that like freedom, even if like Griffin's piece, his is about maybe 10 minutes, right? And still a nice cohesive piece. I think just knowing that you can have that flexibility and freedom to like let the piece grow, because so many, you guys know that so many times there are time restrictions that come out of certain like necessities, right? And so it's just very, it's liberating. So I was happy to do that. It's a very unruly piece, but but there was something else I wanted to say. You mentioned about Griffin's piece, the cutaway, what was that middle movement, cutover lands.
Cutover lands, yeah.
And there's an aspect of silence that is captured, not silence or quietude. And that's kind of been a theme in some of the other discussions that I've had in this series, is like the idea of silence, which is a very beautiful thing. I think we all, as musicians, silence is one of those things that we're very interested in. But at the same time, one of our first guests, Marty Epstein, she, talked about the silence of quarantine in Boston, and how the sounds are missing that we should have. And I think in a similar way, like something like, cutover lands, there's an emptiness that feels sad because we know the meaning behind it.
Yeah, and when we go out to a backpacking trip, one of the cool things about a backpacking trip versus just like car camping is you're not in a campground, so you have a real shot at not just solitude, but a real quiet. That's and sometimes actually the forest at night is kind of loud. Like there can be a lot of sound, but there are certain times of day where it's eerily quiet, and if the wind stops and you don't even have that sound, you can actually have like a real silence. And I don't feel like I can get that anywhere else, and I think that's part of why we go do it.
You mentioned refreshing. I think that's important too. Like there can be like maybe an idea that like as artists you're supposed to constantly be searching for inspiration from somewhere, but it's also important to just recharge and not think. And I think this is when your subconscious mind is also working too, just absorbing something around you without a purpose.
Right. Yeah. You just go out and whatever you are allowing yourself to just experience, as opposed to that sort of conscious, this will inspire me to whatever, it comes out regardless of what you've experienced. It comes out in the music without even trying.
Yep. Okay, let's listen to that slow movement here.
Nice.
Nice to listen to that.
Yeah, it's nice to hear that again.
It's been a while. Have you guys listened to that recording since the performance?
It's since the performance, yes.
Yeah, maybe once.
But it's been a while.
Yeah.
It's crazy, you know, when that effect that happens in the middle of it, where I'm doing a wind, just a, and Amy on the violin is doing this really crazy ponticello tremolo kind of thing, and then Ben finishes with the bowed cymbal. At first, when we were working on it, I thought, oh, it's the wind that should be going through the trees. But when I heard it just now, it has this sinister edge to it, like it's this echo of somebody sharpening a saw. Just
that's what Griffin said. That's what
really?
That's where you got.
Oh yeah.
Yeah. Griffin, that's what Griffin said.
Griffin,
He said, "Oh yeah, it's the
mad
saw."
genius."
That's the great thing, right? Is like you hear, you know, associating it with the kind of the title and the theme of the piece, and everyone. I mean, who knows what you would, if he called it something different, what would that sound have been?
Yeah, I think even Cathie's notion that it was like this wind that we don't actually get to hear anymore, like a kind of gloomy ghost wind.
Yeah.
Serves the piece too. And I think when we recorded it, she had shared that, and we were like, yeah, okay, that sounds right to me. And so that's what we tried to inhabit. And I don't think it loses any potency when you flip the script a little bit, because those are both sort of similar ideas, that there's this loss and cause. But it's a cool piece.
Yeah.
And it's very pretty. I think he walked the careful tightrope in that piece to be at times very beautiful, and at times very spacious, and at times almost like maudlin, but never kind of gets into too sentimental one thing of those. And I like that about the piece, is that it's never a song, and it almost is always a song, but it's never quite a song.
That's, you know, I was going to say something just like that, but much less eloquently than you put it now. So yeah, thank you for that. I totally agree. It's like about this sense of loss, but it's also very beautiful at the same time. And it's a really, really nice movement. Maybe could you talk about how that collaboration with Griffin came about, and sort of the stages of bringing that piece to life a little bit?
Yeah. I think this is kind of a typical, in some ways, a very typical story, that Griffin and Jennifer crossed paths on a recording project in some other capacity, and that's where they met. And then Griffin was applying for a competition with the piece, and he needed somebody who would record the piece. So we sort of did a tit for tat, where we would record and perform the piece, and he would have that so he could enter the competition, but we wouldn't pay like a normal commissioning fee for it. So it was sort of both sides of none of us have a ton of money, so let's just collaborate.
Mutually beneficial. Yeah.
Yeah. And And the reason I feel, pretty comfortable telling that story to a composer, be like, yeah, we got away with not paying him that much, was that the subsequent relationship with him is that we co-commissioned with New Music Detroit, and I'm going to screw up the name of the other ensemble, so I just won't say it. But we co-commissioned with them a cello concerto that he wrote, that he just. And so it's been a real treat to work with him a second time, and he got that cello part to me right at the beginning of the quarantine.
So now you have time to work on it. So that
right. I can really dig into it, and it's been a real treat. And that one, we feel like we're putting our money into that project very happily, and can support him right now while he's in the same situation a lot of us are, where we don't get a lot of performing income, and commissions are going to be affected.
Yep, absolutely.
But then so that they met, and then he needed an ensemble, and so we talked it out. And John Bologna who does a really cool Sacramento podcast about music too, was our audio engineer on that one. And everybody just sort of worked together, and we put in a little money. He put in the time and effort to do it, and I think it was a really good collaboration that way, where everybody felt like they were getting something out of it.
Great. And was that a co-commission with like other soloists as well, or just orchestras?
The concerto?
The concerto, yeah.
It's actually a chamber concerto, so it's
okay.
Written with Citywater in mind. Not just me as the cellist, but Citywater, and it's written for slightly flexible instrumentation as the accompaniment parts. Which is one of the novelties about it. And because we're a Puro Plus, but New Music Detroit has different instrumentation available, and the other group has even more different instrumentation available. So so that was kind of where Griffin put his energies into writing a cello concerto that had this sort of fundamental core to it, but then a lot of it can be flexible instrumentation around that.
So that sounds like a really smart way for Griffin to write a piece too, with a flexible open instrumentation. That's really how you get pieces played, is to do that. That's good.
Well, I think it's one big good way to do it.
Yeah, for sure. Speaking of the idea of loss of environment, one of the questions I wanted to ask both of you is, how has the crisis of climate change kind of impacted the way you think about music, if at all? Whether it has to do with ethical questions of what you're doing as musicians, or just programming choices, or, I mean, the answer to that could also just be it hasn't necessarily.
That's a hard one to answer, because I feel like, especially now, I feel like the issue of climate change isn't just one issue anymore, because of who it impacts and how it impacts them, and the disproportionate way it impacts people. And because of that, I feel like you don't talk about the one thing without talking about the other. And I really hope we start talking about that even more. That we start talking about how environmentalism, or climate change, man-made climate change, is a huge problem that exacerbates all these other problems. And that when we address one, we need to think about the other. And the complexity of that, I think, is probably gonna be what our generation, our moment, is going to be forced to become very, very good at. If we're to move forward at all or survive this time, it's that we have to deal with the complexity of how these things affect one another. And I think, when I think about new music and American music and new American music and new classical music, that all comes with a lot of cultural information that needs to be processed along with these things that have led to climate change, because sometimes they're moving lockstep through history. And so I don't see it as an independent issue necessarily for classical music anymore, but I definitely see it as part of the set, that is always going to need to be addressed from here on out.
I think that makes a lot of sense. Was there anything you want to add to that, Cathie? Or
Well, I can't say honestly that I have sought out particular pieces that might deal with the overwhelming variety of issues that come up with when one thinks about climate change. But I definitely appreciate when composers are willing to tackle it and produce art from it. And
I think in terms of the idea of things intersecting, I think that's very true. And it's something, it's always been true that these issues have intersected, but I think now, I mean, the coronavirus is a great example of how, the problems in our society have kind of been, that were always there, have been kind of just ripped, the veil has been pulled off even further than it already was pulled off. Like these things are impossible to ignore. We're at a point where I think we're forced to be smarter than we were before. I think that hits on what Tim was sort of saying about, like, we need to start talking about how all these issues intersect, which is very difficult and very challenging. And it's not something that was necessarily expected probably of artists, maybe a decade or so and earlier, but it's something that we just have to do.
Yeah, I actually think it's just enough to acknowledge that it's our reality.
Yeah.
I mean, I think just saying it matters is sometimes hard enough. And the solutions to the problems just in classical music, the answers don't fit in a soundbite or a tweet. They have to be measured and thought about. And it takes a long time to suss that stuff out if you do a good job.
I totally agree. Yeah.
And so I think just being willing to say, let's put in the time now and have the uncomfortable conversations and be aware of the biases that we brought in and try to do better about not having them anymore. I think that in and of itself, just a good faith effort is going to produce at least more comprehensive solutions.
Maybe we could move on to talking about Derek Keller's piece, NorCal Water Music, which is a very different piece from Griffin's piece. A very watery, I would say. And obviously, that the title seems like kind of a reference to Handel's water music also, but it is, yeah. But it wasn't performed on a barge, unfortunately.
Oh.
Maybe next time. Maybe could you guys talk about, there are a lot of really interesting elements to that piece. Maybe you all could talk about
oh man.
That.
Yeah, that piece is cool.
I mean, what a project.
It's just a cool concept. So the scoring of it ended up being slightly like a graphic notation thing where he interposed the watershed maps onto musical staffs, and that became the sort of contour of his melodic material. But then the harmonic structure of it was built out of these tetrachords that have like the overtone series overlay on them. And the sort of long and short of that was that you ended up like Hail Marying for some of these notes, like a lot, because it had to be an overtone series that you had to play on a particular string. And it was this crazy, thoughtful, like well-considered piece of music from every perspective of like the concept. And then we would talk to Derek and be like, this is so hard to play. Yeah. And I mean, just like things that, and I think we tackled it pretty well, and he gave a little bit on some of the things that, we were trying to make happen, and it just was not coming out right. And that's the beauty of it, is like, he's here, and we can say like, hey, let's play this for you. And like, can you get this effect? Can you get what you're going for without me having to do necessarily this thing? And it was really great, and he's wonderful to work with that way, because he's super jazzed about the concept, and he'll be like, I just want this sound. Let's just make that happen. And so you'll sit and you'll work, and it was really pretty cool to have a pretty deep collaboration on the creation of the way you make the sounds. The sounds were in his head, but the way we went about creating them, there was a little bit of give and take, and that was kind of fun.
I have a lot of admiration for that because, like in terms of, I mean, notation is pretty nice for notes, rhythm, and then that's kind of it actually. Timbre is notation does not work very well for it, and like, you know, in the last several decades, like that has become such a, you know, vital part of classical music. So yeah, and that's, as a composer, I mean, that's so challenging to figure out the timbre. And I mean, for me, it's always inevitable that you find that when you write something down, like it sounds different than what you thought it was gonna sound. And as you improve and have practice, you develop little tools that you realize, oh, if I write this, this is what's gonna happen, right? But being able to work with Derek directly, it'll probably allows you guys to prioritize a little bit too, right? Because I mean, that's always a part of performing any kind of pieces. What's the most important thing, and what are the things that, okay, like I do my best, you know, everyone does their best to play it, but you have to, I mean, it's just a normal part. Any ensemble would be lying if they said they weren't prioritizing something.
Right.
For sure. And that is, I mean, everything that you just laid out is part of the attraction of new music in general. I mean, just being able to collaborate with the composer and feel like you've had a hand in creating the piece, not just interpreting the piece, but actually helping to make it what it ends up being prior to your interpretation. It's just it's one of the most exciting things about working with living composers.
I totally agree. It's rewarding for everyone, you know, like, it's a little bit of an old-fashioned idea to imagine like the composer just sitting at their desk, like, oh, and this is how it has to be, and then, oh, we transfer it over. I mean, there are some composers, I think, that are in a position to do that because of how famous or whatever, you know, prestigious they are. But it's also like, I also enjoy, like what you just said, the process of getting input from the people I'm writing for and talking with them, and, you know, letting it be kind of a bit of a co-authorship, because it really is. Another thing I think we could talk about is, Tim, you're the artistic director now of the Festival of New American Music.
Officially or artistic director, or whatever they were called before. We just went with co-director.
Co-director.
Yes, to keep things.
It's you and is Scott Perkins the other one? Okay, so you guys are both working together on you know, at Sacramento State.
Yeah,
an annual festival that happens every fall. For me, it was like how I learned about contemporary music as an undergrad, and it's an incredibly valuable resource for anyone interested in new music. So maybe tell us about, you know, your plans and your ideas for that, especially now given all the uncertainty that faces. I mean, you know better than anyone.
Yeah, I mean, it's. I can tell you it'll be different this year for sure, and I can tell you that a lot of it is probably going to end up being virtual. But I'm really happy that we had written almost all of the grants that we write for the year by the time the shutdown happened, and it looked like Sac State might not have a fall where students got to congregate. But at that point, we had written most of our grants already, and we had received some money. Did you see I started doing Phenom, and I started talking like Steve Lumber?
It's all about this. Where the
God bless Steve Lumber. Yeah. Oh, I love him so much.
He's gonna be in this.
Yeah. And he's now the director of the School of Music. So it's nice to know that the former Phenom, he did that job for 19 years, and now he's in charge of the whole School of Music. So it feels like Phenom is in really good hands, I hope. But yeah, the shutdown means we'll probably do stuff that's a little more virtual, and we've actually been talking to a lot of the groups that we bring in from out of town and been leaning a little bit on some of their creativity about how they think they can present remotely. And it looks like, except for the fact that you won't get to go see it, we'll still have almost all the same number of events, and we'll still be able to pay those ensembles and those performers the way we were before. And that was a huge deal when this all started happening. Scott and I were like, if we can honor those contracts, and they weren't even contracts yet. They were just like letters of invitation. Like if we could just honor those letters of invitation and pay these people to continue to make music when they're hunkered down over the summer and when they're hunkered down in the fall, if there's a way for them to get together safely to rehearse and record, then we want to be able to support them, because Sacramento State is a big institution. It's a big state college. And, you know, there's never enough money, but a big institution like Sacramento State they're the big kid in the conversation. They're the big entity in the conversation. If we can help out the smaller entities and the little performer not-for-profits like Citywater is, then we should do it. And it was really cool that when we started having those conversations about whether we should cancel or whatever, we brought it up because we needed to address it, but almost unilaterally we shot down the idea of postponing or canceling and saying, let's try to support the artists now when they need us. And we are. So that's a great thing about it. It will be different. And but the one of the big themes this upcoming year was going to be women in music. So we were trying to have 100% female and female identified composer base for the entire festival for 2020. And we thought, let's just do it. Let's just try to have an all female composer. And you know what? This will come as a surprise to nobody. It's really easy. Yep. There's phenomenally amazing women composers, and we're like, why didn't we do this before? And so this year is going to be that. And I think Scott and I really want it to be the most inclusive and most representative of all of America new music festival that we can create. From day one, we were like, how can we change that part of this and make it that? And so far so good, because it's not like there aren't phenomenal musicians of every stripe. They're easy to find.
Well, you know, I feel a lot better now hearing about all this from you. That's really exciting. And I knew that you had been thinking about a festival with all women composers for, you know, some time, and to hear that that's still happening, and you know, I mean, I personally am in favor of something happening, even if it's different, rather than something being canceled. So I think it's great that that's still going to happen, and I'll absolutely be tuning in. And also, just like what you said, is that there's plenty of fantastic music to choose from. It's not like, oh no, we're gonna have, how are we gonna find pieces by women composers? It's like, no, don't worry, like there's plenty, and there's really good music, and you know. And to have a inclusive and diverse program, that's super exciting. I'm really interested to hear all the pieces that will be on there. Is there anything you wanted to say about Citywater? What's going on with you all right now? I mean, of course, your plans have had to be a little bit shifted too, but what's...
We were going to do another landscape performance in September, but it looks like we're going to try and make that happen, but later, when it's safe to congregate. And then we just finished up the Big Day of Giving, big fundraiser day, and Citywater had some great support from Sacramento, so thank you, Sacramento, and beyond.
Seriously.
And so we now have like our budget that we know we can work with, and so we're just going to have to figure out when it's safe for us to congregate and rehearse, and once we can start to figure out what our pieces are going to be, and probably put together something for the fall that's also virtual and maybe pre-recorded, and just put that out there in the world as a performance. We're an ensemble that is like many ensembles, that ticket sales in and of themselves don't actually bring in a whole lot of revenue for new music ensembles in general, because it tends to be a pretty select small audience. I hope that changes, but it's not going to change during the coronavirus.
Well, I mean, yeah.
And so it's not like we take a hit if we just put content out for free and say, like, if you make a donation to Citywater, here's a whole concert's worth of music that we've worked on, we've performed, we're happy with. Here it is. That's what we wanted to do. We wanted to give it to you. If you want to kick something back, great. But it's not like we're going to lose revenue from ticket sales, because that's not really it's not really where we made money anyway. So, but as
That's a
soon
whole
as
other conversation about how
yeah,
to
but as soon as
but we can talk about capitalism and a free market
oh,
or
yeah.
academia, but maybe, yeah.
How long is this?
Yeah.
I think we don't have
part
time.
two.
Yeah.
Yeah. But the as soon as we can perform live again, oh my God, I want to perform live again.
Oh yes. Oh my gosh.
Yeah.
It's just not the same.
No.
It's not.
And I have been eating content. I've been just slurping up everything everybody's putting out on the web, and I would almost give anything just to hear somebody be in the same room with me playing something, an acoustic instrument, except for her because I get to play her. I get to hear her all the time.
Yeah.
But
at least you have each other.
Yeah. But it's like just that live experience. I hope one of the silver linings to the Corona lockdown is that people realize what that means more. To be able to be in the same room with the same people creating that art in that moment.
Yeah, totally.
And with no filters or electronics between you and the sound and the acoustically created sound. I just think that's the most powerful thing we've created in our culture. And
it's an ancient thing, and it's something that's not going anywhere. I mean,
right.
I mean that's really true, right? I mean, I've known that music is really about community. That's one of the most important things. It's about people coming together and sharing a space, sharing sounds. But I think just being in lockdown for the last, 2 or months or more, it's really, I mean, 2 months is not really that long, but it feels like an eternity.
Yeah.
And it's like, it really gives me a fresh appreciation for that experience. You realize what's important. So anyway, is there anything else that you both want to add?
Yeah, we actually, I'll let you in on a little secret. We are going to go camping tomorrow.
Oh,
Yes.
Good.
We found a place we could get to by canoe.
Okay.
Yeah. It's a campground that you can only get to by boat.
Well, that seems pretty remote.
Yeah.
So-
yeah. And it's an island. Very tiny island.
Pretty cool. Well, thank you so much for doing this. It's really, really nice to talk to you and hear your perspectives, and wish you all the best with your future plans.
Thanks, you too.
Back at you.
Be well.